Hey guys, I just wanted to touch base with you about the rhetorical analysis. You guys are putting all of your components together. You wrote an introduction and you added your summary and you added the paragraphs that you have on the rhetorical devices. So you guys are going to be writing your rough draft soon and meeting with me about these. So I just wanted to touch base about how all of these components work together in your rhetorical analysis. So I've added, if you go to coursework and units, we're in unit 3. At the bottom in the rhetorical analysis resources folder, I've added a document about rhetorical analysis structure. So this document, it goes over each section and how they work together with a brief explanation, and they also have a list of things that you should include in each section. So the point of your rhetorical analysis is you are looking at a text and you are arguing that the author is making an effective argument or making an ineffective argument. So you are arguing, right? You are making an argument essay. And your claim is if it's effective or not. So you want to start with an introduction. You want to say, first of all, hey, here's the text. Familiarize your audience who has not read this text with this text. By doing so, you, in order to do so, you give a one-sentence summary. You give the full name of the author and the full name of the article in MLA format, which means quotes and capitalize the words in the title. Ever after, you refer to the author by their last name, not their first, but the first time you mention the author, you have to do the full name. You give the author's credentials, who is this person, the original context, where was it published. So basically, this is kind of like the context paragraph in your summary and synthesis essay, where you went over, you talked about the conversation. Who is this person? Why should we listen to him? You're introducing the concept and the text. Give the audience some purpose. We worked on that, and end with the thesis statement. We'll come back to that. So after you introduce this text and the author, then you give a summary of the text. You have to recreate the argument for your reader who has not read it, as you know. So you want to give the author's claim and how they support this claim. So you are not just saying the author is arguing this, because then your reader only knows what the author is arguing. You want to also say, give the reasoning behind it, the thought process, the examples. They need to have this information so that they will understand your analysis later. So you want to be completely unbiased in this presentation at this point. You're saying what the author said, what the author argues. You want them to fully understand the article before you talk about how you interpret it. So no bias, no analysis. That comes later. When you get, your bias doesn't come later, but your analysis does. So when you get into the argument, you are moving into how the author is making the argument. What strategies do they use? We can use the term rhetorical devices, rhetorical choices, but basically these are ways in which the argument is being made. You will have 3 body paragraphs, and each paragraph will be on its own choice. You will not mix ethos and pathos in one paragraph. So make sure if you have a paragraph on ethos, it's just ethos. If it's just pathos, if it's pathos, it's just pathos. So make sure they will have their own structure. So, when you're doing ethos, ethos is like establishing a character. This person wants to establish, like Pamela Ronald, right away, you know that she's like a scientist. But also she said right away that she's married to a farmer. So you could, what are different ways in which she builds a character that, for her audience, she's building herself up as a character. How are these effective? How does it affect the audience? So so you need to have a couple of examples of each thing. You want to say she establishes ethos in a few different ways. She gives her credentials. She mentions that she has a farmer as a husband. This affects her audience because her audience, in this way, her audience might not realize that she actually works with a farmer and works with somebody who works with the land rather than a lab. You have to talk about this kind of thing. So in each of these paragraphs, you'll have a topic sentence saying right away which one of these devices you're going to talk about. Don't make your reader guess. Tell me right away. You need examples, usually in quotes. But if your example is, say, the photograph, you don't necessarily need to have a quote there. You would talk about the photograph and describe it. And then you have to paraphrase this quote and interpret the information. You have to tell me, put it in different words. And then you have to tell me how this is an example of what you say it is. So you can't say, like, Reginald uses lots of statistics to convince his readers. So this would be logos, right? It's how he's presenting this information. And then you have a quote with all these numbers like, there will be 10 billion people. Can we feed 10 billion people by 2050? So there's the numbers. You have to talk about those specific numbers and why they're effective. Not people trust statistics more. I mean, you would talk about why that would be the case. But you want to talk about what about 10 billion is surprising. I mean, it's shocking. It's huge, right? And what about 2050? Like, that's not that far in the future. That's in our lifetime. So you have to really get into the numbers and talk about the significance of each. You can't just say, he has a graduate student and he's been working in it for 40 years, like that quote, and then say, this establishes his credibility. No, you have to say what about that quote establishes his credibility. You have to talk about the details in the sentence, like the 40 years, like the graduate student. So you really have to, basically, this is the hardest part, but you have to point out the ways that these are strategies and explain how they're working. Then you have to bring it back to the audience. How does it affect the audience? So you could talk about pathos. Let's see, Pamela Ronald uses these pictures of starving children. Let's see, one is covered with insecticide, and then later she just talks about the children. But what about these pictures of children? What effect? Now, when you're talking about pathos, you have to say what emotion comes out of it, right? Like, Sarah McLachlan has this video for the pet organization to keep them from killing all these pets, all these stray animals. And in her commercial, she sings this really sad song about death. Like, it says, in the arms of the angels, and it shows all these pictures of these poor animals, right minutes before they die. So these are both strategies. You would say this commercial uses pathos, and you would give examples of this. You would say this song is an example of this pathos because it is slow and melancholic, and it makes you sad. These pictures make you sad, and maybe they make you feel guilty. They make you pity these animals. So you have to talk about how they're working each piece, like the pictures and the song, and then what emotions they evoke and what effect does that have on the audience. So if you're watching this commercial and you get so sad by these poor little animals and this song, what are you going to do? Are you going to go and call the organization and donate money? Because that's what they want you to do. So you have to you have to bring each of these back to the audience. What is the effect on this audience? What is the effect on the audience seeing this picture? What about the time-lapse video? What are the tools these people use? So Ronald uses the time-lapse video, how is that different from using like graphs of data? Think, what effect does that have? Let's see, what else does she use? She uses photos. At the end, there's an interesting question and answer session. What is the point of presenting this information this way, this question? Who would have these questions? Like, would the potential audience have these questions? How would they react to the answers to these questions? Was this an effective way of presenting that information at the end via these questions? So you have to think about the way in which this information is presented to say whether or not it's effective. And that's basically what we're looking at. For ethos, how does the author establish their credibility? For logos, how do they structure their argument and their reasoning? How do they present the numbers? For pathos, how do they capitalize on, and that's kind of a negative connotation, but how do they try to use emotion to get the effect they want? Like, you could say that Ronald uses emotion to show when, in one of our examples, somebody burned down a field of crops that had been going to a group of people that were suffering from malnutrition. So it seems like she was experiencing frustration. She maybe wants you to experience, or not you, but her audience to experience frustration. Like, what are the specific emotions that are being evoked? You can't just say pathos. She uses pathos to convince her audience of this. What are the emotions? How is it working? This is the most important thing. How is the argument working? We can put these terms on it, but I really want you to get into the specific way your author makes the argument. So you have to remember that your audience is a rhetorician. Your audience knows these terms: ethos, logos, pathos. So don't define these terms. It's like saying, like, a couple of you quoted your textbook. So this is like quoting your textbook to the authors of the textbook. Your audience knows this stuff. They don't need to be explained how logos works. They need to be explained how Reginald uses logos, how Reginald establishes his argument with numbers and with statistics and whatever else. So the biggest thing when it comes to logos I've seen is the summary of the argument, and you already have the summary. So you're more examining, instead of the information, you're examining how, like, statistics would be more effective than just saying this is more profitable. And you have to bring it back to the audience. Why would this be effective for this particular audience? So I know that was a long-winded explanation. I hope this is becoming a little more clear, but that's basically what you need to say. And you need to bring it back at the end to the audience. Effectiveness of a rhetorical device. The conclusion: is the author effective? Now, you don't have to have, like, a half-page conclusion. A couple of sentences will be fine. I want you to restate everything and just say, because they were effective with logos and pathos, they established their credibility, they were able to reach this audience because this audience would probably have this effect. Or they weren't able to reach this audience because they were short-sighted when they did this, something like that. But your conclusion will not be about GMOs. Your conclusion will be about whether or not this author is effective. So now that we're done with that, that's when you make your thesis statement. So you'll start with your author's purpose and audience, and why GMO labeling laws won't help U.S. consumers make better decisions. Andrew Scarpelli attempts to convince voters that GMO labeling is ineffective and harmful. Okay, so He wants to convince voters, here's his audience, that GMO labeling is ineffective and harmful. He wants them to vote another way, right? So then you will add your claim, whether or not it's effective. You can do this with an adverb or a phrase. That is missing. So here we have the exact same thesis statement, but we say instead is unsuccessful in his attempt. So this is how you can add your claim in, or you can even just add it as an adverb, effectively convinces. So you throw that in there, right? Just, it doesn't have to be that long. You don't have to add and he is effective. You can play with the different parts. So then you add your predictors. Now these predictors will predict where your essay is going. So if you have your first paragraph is on ethos and your second paragraph is on enthymemes and your third paragraph is on rhetorical distance, you'll say it in that order, right? So you have your topic sentence, and then you say is ineffective and harmful by establishing ethos, utilizing pathos, and employing a close rhetorical distance. So now I know that the next paragraph, the first argument paragraph, is going to be on ethos. The second argument paragraph is going to be on pathos, and the last one's going to be on rhetorical distance. So this is how you put together a thesis statement. So I know that you guys have already turned in your introduction, and you've already turned in your thesis statement, and you've already turned in your argument paragraph. But I also know that we're just kind of like stumbling along at this point and putting our best foot forward, which is great. But now we're refining more. So hopefully I want you to have an idea of this before we meet in our conferences. Now our conferences start on Tuesday, and they go through Friday. If this is you need to have a rough draft done by this point. If you would rather meet me on at a later date, you need to let me know as soon as possible, because technically you have until Monday, but I would really like to get it done before then. Just let me know, honestly, because the rough draft is due technically the day we have the conference, but it's also technically due Wednesday. And you have until Wednesday to do your final draft. I would rather talk earlier rather than later. So it's best to have as much done as possible, but you also want to, so I can give you more complete feedback, but you also want to get started on it soon. So let me know if for some reason you have to do it over the weekend, but we want to be done sooner rather than later. So sign up for a conference. If you're going to be out of town, we will Skype, and some of you have already sent your Skype name, and I will add you soon. So please let me know if you have any questions. So, thanks.